This tying demonstration is on how to tie a classic pulling lure called the Tequila Blob. The hook we're using is a Hanak H260 size 10. The thread we're going to use is Textreme Standard 6.0 in fluorescent hot orange. So the first step is to attach the thread at the eye of the hook. Now we're going to add a tail to the blob, and for the tail we're going to use UV Flashabou. This is the unsupported pure Flashabou, UV Flashabou. So we'll cut off a small bunch of fibres, about 8 or 10 fibres, and we'll tie these in on the top of the shank of the hook, just behind the eye, and we'll whip neatly down to the gape of the hook, just in neat touching turns. And once we get to the start of the turn, we'll trim off the excess. Now this blob is a two-tone blob, and we're going to use the classic tequila colours, using Gelcore Fritz in fluorescent yellow and fluorescent orange. For the rear half of the body, we're going to use the fluorescent yellow Gelcore Fritz. So with most Fritz, what you want to do is just tweeze out some of the fibres just to expose the core, and we want to just tie in the core with 2 or 3 thread turns and bring the thread up to the halfway point on the shank of the hook. And with Fritz, so wrap it around the shank of the hook, and on each turn we're just pulling the fibres backwards, and that just frees them from being trapped. So we'll do 3 turns of the fluorescent yellow. Again, just keeping the tension on the Fritz, keep it nice and tight. And then we'll do 2 turns to secure the yellow Fritz and trim off the excess. And if we sweep the fibres back and just do another couple of turns before we attach the orange, and that will keep the fibres flowing in the right direction. And for the front half of the body, we're going to use the fluorescent orange Gelcore Fritz. Again, just tweezing out a few fibres and attach the core onto the shank of the hook. And now we can bring the thread up to the eye of the hook. And with the same process, just wrapping the Fritz around the body, pulling the fibres back on each turn so they don't get trapped. And with most Fritzes there's a twist in it, so occasionally you might need to just twist the material around to allow the fibres to flow back in an easier direction. And once we get up to the eye of the hook, we'll just secure the Fritz with 2 turns, keeping the tension on the thread at all times. And lastly, before we cut off the excess, with your fingers, if you just sweep the fibres back and do 3 or 4 turns just to keep it tidy before we build the head. And with the excess we can just snip off. Often it helps just wetting your fingers just to move these fibres backwards. And then lastly we can whip finish. And we can trim the thread off. Now you'll notice I've left the tail to the very end. That's so often if we cut the tail before we attach the yellow, wrap the yellow Fritz, then we can inadvertently leave the tail too short. So if you just leave the tail fibres till the very end, and then you can accurately just trim off the tail fibres to whatever length you want. I usually like to leave the tail just about half a centimetre beyond the Fritz. Now again, round about the eye of the hook here, there's these odd little straggler fibres, and again I'm using the Thread Zap 2 tool, which will just burn away these stray fibres without damaging the head. And then lastly, we can just apply a light drop of varnish to the head. And there we are. It's a really good pulling lure on UK waters. Tequila Blob with UV Flashabou tail tied with Jalcor Fritz in fluorescent yellow and fluorescent orange.